maybe we could start by speaking a little bit about Pärt's own background, because of course there are several different phases in his career or in his output, and it might be interesting for people who don't have the opportunity, because very few people have the opportunity to know about that first phase of composition for him.
Sure. Well, Pärt, many of you probably know, Pärt is a living composer, born in 1935, still very actively composing today. And the Pärt that we know about today is the Pärt of, as Kyle mentioned, this simplicity, this spiritual composer, this very sonorous, very tonal, very beautiful, very spiritual. Before all of that came to be, Pärt was a very different composer, writing in the late 1950s and 1960s, as he was a student in first Tallinn, Estonia, and then in Moscow as well. Pärt wrote in what we call today a serial style, using the 12-tone serial technique. What's very interesting to me, and in the research and the work that I'm currently doing, is I'm bridging the two periods of his compositional life from the 1960s, which you'll hear in a moment is very, very different from the music that most of us know today of Arvo Pärt. So first of all, what is serial music? What is 12-tone music? This is music where there is no tonal center, there is no home. Each pitch, 12 notes within an octave, is equal to one another. And so a composer would fashion a 12-tone row, some would say by sort of happenstance, a bit randomly choosing pitches, but there is some definite method involved. But the pitches don't have any sort of sense of being home at the end of it. And Pärt develops his 12-tone style in a very different way than we might have expect from other composers, those composers notably of the second Viennese school, Webern and Schoenberg and Berg, who will write a very complex 12-tone row in which they can then develop and change and manipulate. They can play it backwards, they can play it forwards, they can play it upside down, they can transpose it in many different ways. Pärt's 12-tone music doesn't do that at all. It's a much simpler approach, and in a way then foreshadows the music that he's going to write later in the 1970s and 80s with this new Tintinnabuli style. What's unique though about both styles is that they use virtually the same process. So I'm going to ask our quartet of singers to join me on stage here. And here we have soprano Michelle DeBoer and Diane English, our alto, Bud Roach, our tenor, and John Pepper, our bass, quartet of singers. This piece that we're going to start with comes from 1964. It's called Solfeggio. And I've chosen this for two reasons. First, 1964 was a very important compositional year for Pärt. He wrote 4 very influential, sort of seminal pieces in this serial style. This isn't really one of them, and you'll see why in a moment. But it was a very important year for him compositionally, as he developed this language of his in serial music. The elements here are very simple. It's simply a major scale, starting on C, ending on C, repeating over and over again. Pärt has this way of beginning a piece, formulating the idea behind a piece, and then letting go of the piece and letting it unravel itself. And perhaps this is the simplest example of how Pärt does this, just with the C major scale. So I'm going to have the singers demonstrate this one time first, and then I hope you all brought your singing voices, because I'm going to have you sing with us too.
See
utterly simple, and yet, as we were rehearsing this little excerpt earlier this evening, the singer said, we have no sense that we're in the middle of a major scale here, because the tones are complementing each other in such a way that you sort of get lost and listen rather than listening to a melody from start to finish, going from bottom to top. You're hearing the clusters of tones as they meet in the middle. Just to prove the point here, though, you can sing the scale from top to bottom. The words are easy. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, with the singers, as they change registers and create different clusters of pitches based on the clusters they're singing. So here we go. So start at the bottom of the scale rather than at the top. If you start where Michelle does and then go up, we're in big trouble. So start down here, okay? 3. Re, you might want to go down an octave now again, and do. We got to the end already? No. I was so enamored by what was going on up here, and I guess you guys repeated the anyway. You see what he's done here is that literally the piece, which if we were to do the whole thing, lasts about 6 minutes, and if you've got a full chorus, you can really slow it down to concentrate on these tone clusters rather than the individual melody. It's a stunning, shimmering piece. So at its very simplest, Pärt has taken very minimal elements here and created something. What I think is unique about this composer is that element of letting go. He designs the process here. The process being, we're going to start at the bottom of the scale, we're going to go up, we're going to alternate voices, men, women, that sort of thing, and then he lets go and lets the piece write itself. And so much of the music that we encounter, so much of the music that we'll discuss this evening is exactly that way, where the kernels of the piece are established at the beginning by the composer. You could imagine him writing on graph paper or something at his kitchen table, sort of what the rules are going to be, and then just letting it happen. And it's really quite an extraordinary thing. Thank you.
The other thing, of course, that's worth speaking about a little bit is there was a time when, Pärt was considered almost one of the darlings of the Soviet sort of music era. Of course, he studied in Moscow and so on, but eventually he began to write music, especially music that had a religious text, as in the Credo, that got him into a lot of trouble with the Communist Party. And I love it the way it's often said that he was, quote, encouraged to leave Estonia in 1980. And I wonder if, and of course that also overlapped with a very important change in his style period. But could you speak a little bit about, in a sense, the politics or what was going on in Estonia at the time he was doing this?
Yeah, so Pärt, of course, living in Estonia in 1968 or 1950s, this is a Soviet nation at this point, and there were very strict restrictions on what a composer, what an artist, what an author could do, and everything needed to be approved by cultural authorities. There was a bureaucracy for everything, and you had to follow the right channels. As you say, he was sort of the darling of the Soviet establishment, musical establishment for a time. But in 1963, he got into his first little area of trouble. He wrote a piece called Necrologue, which was his first fully 12-tone, although he only uses 10 pitches actually, 10 rather than 12, fully serial piece of music. And serialism in the Soviet period was also frowned upon, not just because of sacred text, but the serialism itself was frowned upon because of its formalism and its relation to Western music, what Western composers were doing outside of the Iron Curtain. This piece that he wrote, Necrologue in '63, was was dedicated to the victims of fascism. And that was another thing that sort of put an X against his name, according to the Soviet authorities. If you fast forward now to 1968, you mentioned the piece Credo. This is a piece that really encapsulates his whole serial period. We've got a clip that we're going to show in just a second here. In addition to the serial nature of his music, he also used a technique that he calls collage, in which he takes music from another composer and note for note, verbatim, he slaps it into his music. Most notably, he uses music by J.S. Bach. And in Credo, he harvests, he takes as the seed of the composition, the C major prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, which you'd recognize in a moment, of broken arpeggios in C major and then A minor. It's a very familiar piece of music. What happens in the middle of this piece, though, is the Bach that he inserts at the beginning deconstructs itself and becomes itself a 12-tone row. The harmonic structure of that C major prelude is so related to tonic dominant relations. Do, so, do. You just sang some of those notes a moment ago. And so he constructs the 12-tone row that becomes out of this piece from the harmonic structure of Bach. So Bach disintegrates into 12-tone, and then by the end of the piece, actually Bach returns, if you listen to the whole 14-minute piece. In the middle, though, is complete chaos. The 12-tone row itself deconstructs into just noise. We're going to hear that in just a second. The text that he's setting here is a sacred one. The piece is called Credo, I believe, but he doesn't set the creed as you might expect. He sets a verse from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, which is from the Sermon on the Mount, in which Christ, who is the speaker, says, it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say unto you that you resist no evil. This was seen as a very provocative text to choose. A, it's a sacred text. B, it has this element of sort of sticking it to the man, so to speak, that you shouldn't, you shouldn't fight back, but actually turn the other cheek, so to speak. And so musically, Pärt does exactly what Christ is saying on this mountain. He takes the Judaic law and turns itself upside down, and that's what Pärt does musically. So we've got a clip here of Tonal Caluste conducting this piece. You're not going to hear any Bach at all. This is right in the middle and pretty close to the chaos section, I think.
Now, that sounds drastically different than I think the style we're all used to with Arvo Pärt. Am I making that assumption for everybody? Is that? I think some of us might know that piece, but that was the first time when we're doing research for this. That's the first time I heard that piece, and was very surprised. But
absolutely, and just a word there. You saw the close-up on the pianist right at the very beginning of that clip, playing very fast notes. The notes that the pianist was playing were actually Bach's prelude played backwards. So this is the point at which Pärt is starting. The deconstruction of Bach is still ongoing, and chaos ensues momentarily. And perhaps it's a good thing that we stopped just now. The chorus just screams at the top of their lungs. literally. I mean, it's just a black box on the music where the chorus has this music.
Yes, and the other interesting thing, of course, is it's not only Bach that was deconstructing. Am I right that around 1968 is when Pärt began to go through, it wasn't exactly a blockage, but he literally stopped writing music for 8 years. So clearly this was a step on a path that eventually went in a very different direction.
This was more than a step. This was the step off the diving board, quite literally, because this is the piece that caused it to all come apart for Pärt. In 1968, as I said, everything needed to be approved ahead of time by these bureaucrats, and of course this never would have flown. And yet it got its premiere in Tallinn. Neeme Järve, the Estonian conductor, conducted the premiere in '68. It's one of those stories that you could never make up and could never orchestrate, but the guy whose job it was to stamp the music saying, yeah, this is okay, was on holiday. And so it literally slipped through the cracks, got its way to the concert hall, and the officials were furious. They were furious. And so this piece sent Pärt into Paul Hillier, who wrote sort of the first English language biography of Pärt, calls it, it wrote Pärt into a cul-de-sac. He didn't know where to go. The officials came down very, very hard on him. Basically, he was persona non grata and didn't know what to do. He sent himself into this self-imposed silence for about 8 years. And when he re-emerged from this, it is, as you said, a very different music, probably the music that most of you thought you were coming to hear tonight.
On the other hand, during those 8 years, he wasn't just sitting in a closet. It turned out he was studying Gregorian chant and polyphony, and perhaps you could just tell us a little more about what we now understand about those 8 years of apparent silence.
He was working very, very, very hard at trying to understand what was going to be next for him compositionally. He, as Lawrence said, he studied Gregorian chant, he studied Renaissance and early medieval polyphony, Periton and the sort of Parisian school of polyphony, whatever he could get his hands on. Of course, that was another thing. It was hard to get your hands on this kind of music, especially the sacred music, in Soviet Estonia at that time. And so he really immersed himself somewhat quietly in this music, but studied Gregorian chant. He studied the Psalms. He studied this Renaissance polyphony. He wrote out every single psalm by hand, at least once, if not more than once. And he's got these notebooks that still occupy his bookshelves, notebook after notebook that he looks to, and somehow over that process, over those years, through this process, he came to relate to a new way of thinking about music, about the music that he was going to write. In 1977, he wrote his first piece in what we now call the Tintinnabuli style, what he calls the Tintinnabuli style. It was a piece for piano called Für Alina in the spirit of Beethoven's Für Elise, and it's just this very simple piano piece. Two voices only going at any one time, and it's here that he sort of began to experiment with what would come next.
Yeah, this term Tintinnabuli, or however it's properly pronounced, it's a word that we hear a lot. It literally means little bells.
Little bells.
But it has a lot more significance than that. Perhaps since it is a term that you see in all the recording, booklets and so on. Maybe you could speak a little bit about.
Well, Pärt coined this term himself, tintinnabulation. It means little bells, as Lawrence said, and I think rather than me talk too much about it, we can hear a little bit about what tintinnabulation sounds like by comparison to the music that we've heard thus far. So I'll ask the singers to come back, and then I'll sort of reference what it is you're hearing. This is a short excerpt from a piece called Summa. It's interesting that very, very soon after this period of silence, Pärt returns to the text of the Creed, this time the entire Creed, the Latin Creed, the Nicene Creed, Credo in unum Deum, an idea of which he left behind in 1968. So this is one of the first pieces, the first choral piece that he wrote in this new style.
Credo in unum Deum, Patrem omnipotentem, factorem caeli et terrae, visibilium omnium, et invisibilium, et in unum Dominum Iesum.
So the music goes on from there. That was just the first 6 measures. So for Pärt, what is new about this music is that now he's writing exclusively in a 2-voice texture. One voice he calls the melody voice. The other voice he calls the Tintinnabuli voice. M voice, T voice. You'll see that a lot in writing about Pärt's music. The M voice is almost, the melody voice is almost always a scalar. Like the do, re, mi that we sang at the beginning of the evening, it's almost always conjunct. It doesn't leap around, it just moves in one direction or the other. The Tintinnabuli voice, on the other hand, Pärt devises a system of using a triad, notes of a triad that relate somehow to the Tintinnabuli voice. For Pärt, these relationships have very important significance, musical, extra-musical significance, spiritual significance.